Nighttime blackouts at 3:07 a.m. seemed like a system glitch until the face of a man who died long before they met appeared on the screen.
The blackouts started as a joke on the day shift, a hiccup the IT guy at City Hall posted about in a Slack channel Emma never opened. By the time she noticed them, they had already settled into a pattern that felt like a heartbeat slightly off rhythm. The first one that really mattered hit on a Tuesday that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper in the night dispatch room. 3 calls waited in the queue, their little red icons pulsing at the bottom of the screen, when all 4 monitors shivered and went dark together, as if a giant thumb had pressed the power button on the whole of Havenport. Emma's hands tightened on the headset, her other palm braced against the laminate desk, and every muscle in her body leaned toward the glass window that looked out over Main and 3rd. The habit of staying in her chair, holding the line open for the voices that might still be there, turned out stronger than the instinct to run to the window. The blue rectangle of the backup unit barely lit the console, and beyond the dispatcher's glass everything dropped out. The traffic light at Main and 3rd froze on yellow without blinking, like a fixed eye, and the city seemed to hang in a held breath. In the gray surface of the dead monitor, a stranger's room slowly came through, as if another image had been laid over the glass. A narrow window onto a parking lot, a narrow bed, a man in a faded t-shirt propped against white hospital pillows, his eyes closed, his face slack with the kind of tired that went past sleep. The feed looked like bad video, flat light, dull colors, a flicker around the edges, as though someone had pointed an old webcam at a room that didn't quite want to be seen. "Emma, you with me?" A voice crackled in her left ear, too loud in the sudden dark. She blinked, and the hospital room smeared, the man's face dissolving back into her own reflection and the faint green wink of the backup unit as power rolled over from somewhere else. The queue of calls pumped back up like nothing had happened, red icons stacking in polite panic at the bottom of the main screen. "Dispatch, go ahead," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. Her fingers remembered which keys to hit, which boxes to open. Her body did the job while her mind stayed half-turned toward the glass that had just shown her a stranger asleep in a room that shouldn't have been connected to them at all. By the end of the shift, the blackout had joined the pile of odd stories the night crew traded between calls. The traffic light stuck on yellow became a joke, Havenport in perpetual caution, and the brief video image became something she almost convinced herself she had imagined. Still, when she closed out her report and folded her headset away, she drew a small circle in the margin of her notebook and wrote down the time, 3:07 a.m. The next night, it happened again. The city outside came and went in the glass. The slow swing of a bus turning past Harbor Mart, the wash of a patrol car's lights, the trembling halo of rain around the street lamps. Inside, the dispatch room hummed with its own small weather, ringtones, printer chatter, the low murmur of Gabby at the next console coaxing an address out of a caller who wasn't entirely sure where they were. At 3:07, the lights did not flicker. Only the monitors did, a quick seizure of pixels, and then the main screen she used for incident logs stopped being hers. The same narrow hospital room swam up out of the dark, a little sharper this time, as if the connection had improved. The man on the bed was awake now, or something close to it, his head tipped toward the window. eyes half open on whatever lay beyond the pane. The wall clock over the door in his room also read 3:07. Emma? Gabby's chair squeaked as she pivoted. You seeing this? Emma asked, before she could talk herself out of it. Gabby squinted at the monitor. On her side of the console, the screen showed exactly what it should. Incident list, text chat with patrol cars, a blinking notification about a storm watch later in the week. Seeing what? Gabby said, the word stretching as she looked from the monitor to Emma's face. Nothing, Emma lied, because the call cue ticked up again and the habit of staying in motion pulled her fingers back to the keyboard. But when the screen returned to normal, she added a second circled time to her notes, the numbers pressed darker than they needed to be. The third time, she paused the moment the monitors went down. She snatched a sticky note and wrote in block letters, Room 317, then taped it to the corner of the console in case the picture returned. It did. The bed, the window, the parking lot light outside, a crooked TV mounted high in the corner playing a silent loop of weather footage. The man lay on his side now, face turned away, cords like thin white vines trailing from under his shirt to the monitor near his shoulder. The number stenciled on the wall outside his door came through in one clean frame before the image wavered, 317. Later, on her break, Emma searched the city hospital's internal directory from the spare terminal in the kitchenette. Room 317, she learned, was on the third floor, east wing, telemetry. She hovered over the patient information field and then pulled her hands back, as if the keys might burn. Dispatchers weren't supposed to go fishing. Curiosity didn't count as an emergency. At the end of the week, she started a new column in her notebook just for the blackouts. In one neat line she wrote, 307, 307, 307, each with a small circle around it, like beads threaded on something she couldn't yet see the length of. When the city pulled them into a joint meeting, it was under fluorescent lights that made everyone look more tired than they admitted. The email called it a coordination briefing about the overnight disturbances the nor'easter expected over the weekend, and the infrastructure events they'd been pretending were glitches. The city pulled them into a joint meeting a week later, folding the 911 center into a room with power and emergency management people who all smelled faintly of wet wool and bad coffee. Emma came because her supervisor told her to bring her notebook, and because the column of circled 3:07 had started to look less like a quirk and more like a message she hadn't quite decoded. The power service conference room was the color of old printer paper. A sagging ceiling tile over the projector, a whiteboard scarred with half-erased grids, a Keurig in the corner that coughed more than it brewed. Maps and line diagrams tiled the walls, red and blue veins feeding Havenport, branching out toward the bay and the interstate. He sat near the end of the table, sleeves pushed up, ID badge clipped a little crooked to his pocket. In person, Noah Reeves looked sturdier than he had in the hospital bed, same line along his jaw, same crease at the corner of his eye, but set now in a face that had learned how to stand in the wind. When the city engineer introduced him as our grid guy from the harbor side, his nod was quick, almost apologetic, as if he were taking responsibility for the wires outside as well as the stain on the ceiling in the coffee. The presentation started its slow crawl, bullet points, acronyms, a low draft that jittered across the slide in tired green, Emma wrote down the usual things: dates, substations, a note about Harbor Drive, and then, almost by habit, added a small circle around 307 in the margin. During a gap while someone muttered at a laptop that refused to talk to the projector, Noah's gaze slipped away from the screen and dropped to the open page in front of her. He didn't lean in or point. His eyes simply moved from one circle to the next, then up to the wall map where a strip of the harbor route had been highlighted in a yellow marker. He reached for the rolling whiteboard without asking, fingers leaving a faint black crescent of marker dust on the edge. With his sleeve pushed higher, the tendons in his forearm stood out as he drew a simple curve. One night's overnight load, then another, the line dipping in the same place each time. He didn't say anything clever. He just marked the repeated dip with the tip of the pen, glanced back at her circled times, and met her eyes for a brief, steady beat. Recognition moved between them in the quiet like a current, needing no explanation. Afterward, the room emptied in twos and threes, chairs scraping, paper cups crumpling. Somehow they ended up walking out at the same pace and into the same wet parking lot, the sky low and the asphalt shining. Twin Lanterns Diner squatted out on Route 1 like a chrome ship run aground. Inside, the neon tubing above the window still clung to raindrops, pulling the red lantern's letters into long, bleeding streaks. They sat across from each other with a plate of fries between them, steam softening the edges of their reflections in the window. The talk went the way it had in the conference room, around the city, not through themselves. Which transformer on Riverfront always moaned first in a heat wave? Which building on Elm called the cops so often that the officers knew the cat's name? Which storm siren still made kids on Lincoln High's field glance up like something enormous might be stepping out of the fog? Emma watched the small habits she never wrote down. The way Noah cupped his hands around the coffee mug before drinking, as if borrowing its heat for a second. The way his eyes flicked to the diner's front window whenever truck headlights washed across the glass, a reflexive check of the lines outside even when he wasn't on a pole. He never asked about the circles in her notebook. Instead, when she described the arc of calls as a storm rolled in, how the city seemed to stand on tiptoe for one long, anxious hour, he drew the same curve on a napkin and set it between them, his fingertip tapping lightly at the downturn. The feeling that rose in her chest had no name simple enough for the notes she kept. It sat there anyway, quiet and insistent, like a relay closing somewhere behind a wall. She might have filed him away as just another name in the network of people she relied on without thinking. Officers on certain beats, nurses on certain floors, if not for the hallway at City Hall. She was there a week later to drop off hard copies of reports because the upload system kept timing out. On her way back from records, a glint of glass caught her eye. A line of framed photographs marched along the wall, former chiefs, retired dispatchers, counselors who had sat through more meetings than anyone deserved. Third from the left in the second row, winter jacket zipped to the chin, snow blurred behind him into a halo of white noise. No looked out at a point over her shoulder. The brass plaque beneath the frame read, Noah Reeves, line technician, in appreciation, 5 years service, 2013 to 2018. The dates stopped 5 years ago. Emma stood there long enough that a clerk carrying a box of toner had to sidestep around her. Her hand rose toward the frame and stopped just short of touching the glass. The surface threw her own face back at her along with his, their features overlapping for a heartbeat. Later, alone in the dispatch room with only the screens for company, she pulled up an old news item through the municipal archive. There he was again, younger, in a grainy photo by a fallen pole on Harbor Drive, the caption explaining how a line technician had been injured in a storm response and later died at City Hospital. The date in the headline matched the first year she had worked nights. She tried, once, to tell Gabby any of this, but the conversation skidded sideways the moment she reached the part about the hospital room. "Look, we all see weird stuff on nights," Gabby said, not unkindly, hands busy rewinding cord around the headset. "You want a therapist? I got 3 names. You want a priest? I can probably find one on speed dial. You want IT? They'll tell you to clear your cache." Emma laughed, because that was what the moment required, and did not say the thing that pressed against her teeth, that the face on her screen and the man at the diner and the man in the frame were the same, and also not in any way the same. The nor'easter swept in with the kind of forecast that made the city twitch. Sandbags appeared like mushrooms along low doorways. Signage went up about parking bans and warming centers. In the dispatch room, they added an extra pot of coffee and cleared the whiteboard for storm-related notes. On the grid side, from what she heard through the cross-channel chatter, they were drawing thick circles on their own maps: Harbor Drive, King Street, the hospital, the nursing home on the hill. Emma started a new page in her notebook, the date underlined twice, leaving space ready for whatever the night would bring. Until midnight, the calls came in like rain itself, steady, manageable. Fender benders, alarms tripped by gusts, one lost dog that turned out not to be lost at all. Then the wind shifted, and the steady became sudden. A transformer near the river threw sparks big enough that someone filmed them from a bar window and posted them before the fire crew even arrived. Lines danced in the wind like jump ropes, slammed back into place, and the sirens started to overlap. From her chair, Emma could feel the city shiver. Not just the building, something in the pattern of calls, the way the intervals shortened, the tone in people's voices tightened. Her own breath shortened to match. At 2:58, the power flickered in a way that had nothing to do with ghosts or memory. The overhead lights dimmed and surged, the monitors blacking for a single blink before recovering. In that blink, she saw the hospital room again, as if it had been waiting just behind the usual image all along. This time, the bed was empty. The corridor to the backup room smelled faintly of dust and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The sound in the walls was higher here, a thin whine that made her teeth ache. The digital display on the panel glowed 3:06. For a moment, with the door closing behind her, the room could have been her studio over Spin City, a box of air with one humming source, a place where someone else's hand had already drawn a curve on the glass. The thought slid sideways, and suddenly the versions of Noah she'd carried with her flickered in quick succession, on the hospital bed, at the diner, in the office by a 95, in the dead monitor light at 3:07. Frame skipping in a loop that never quite aligned. She didn't hear footsteps. One blink he wasn't there, the next, he was. Noah leaned in the doorway like the room itself had exhaled and shaped him out of the air, field jacket open, hair damp from a rain the forecast hadn't mentioned, shoulders squared as if he were holding the jams apart. He looked exactly as she knew him and not at all like a photograph on a wall. No glow, no distortion. Just a man who had spent too many nights under bad weather, carrying more weight than the job description promised. His eyes found hers, and the panic that had been skittering along her nerves flattened into something narrower, sharper. He didn't offer answers, he offered steadiness. His gaze dropped once to the breaker handle, then came back. He gave a small nod, barely a movement, more a ripple at the corner of his mouth. The same almost nod she had seen when he slid the plate of fries closer at Twin Lanterns, when his hand hovered over her notebook and chose not to touch the page. It felt like consent. It felt like apology. It felt like a thank you folded into the narrow space between breaths. Emma stepped up to the panel. The plastic handle was warm against her palm, the vibration inside it alive and tense, like a trapped animal bracing for impact. The display clicked to 307. Somewhere over the harbor, a transformer gave a long, low moan she could hear only in memory. She held that single heartbeat in which everything balanced, the storm, the nursery lamps and bar lights in hospital corridors, the framed photo in City Hall, the smear of a hand on her own window. Then she pulled. The city flinched. Out beyond the dispatch center, a wide swath along the harbor went dark in one deliberate sweep. On her way back to the main room, she passed a window just as the traffic light at Main and 3rd went black, leaving only the glow of emergency vehicles and the faint, stubborn flicker of the Harbor Mart sign down the hill. For the next hour, the calls were fewer but louder. People wanted to know why their block had gone out when the next one hadn't, why the harbor was dark when downtown still shimmered with light. She told them the truth as far as policy allowed, that the outage was controlled, that it was keeping something worse from happening, that crews were working as fast as they could. She did not tell them that she could still feel the ghost of the breaker handle in her hand, or that when she blinked she saw a man in a hospital bed not being in that bed at all. By dawn, the nor'easter had pushed inland, leaving Havenport rinsed and oddly hushed, as if the town had been turned over under running water and set back down in almost the same place. Puddles filled the dips in King Street, branches and fast food cups and one crooked traffic cone lay stranded on the sidewalks. The debrief at City Hall took place in a conference room that smelled of wet wool and supermarket donuts. Uniform jackets steamed on the backs of chairs. Paper cups left sweating brown rings on an old laminate table. The windows showed only a flat, pale sky and the brick wall of the building across the alley, the town's edges reduced to a stripe of gray. The report from the grid authority called the outage an unusual but effective manual load shed, the language so careful it might have been written in gloves. Coordination between dispatch and field engineering, it said, had averted a catastrophic failure. The paragraph made no mention of 307. Emma held the printed graph of the night's load in both hands, smoothing its edges the way she might smooth a sheet over a sleeping child. The deliberate dip set there in the middle, circled in a neat, impersonal color that looked like it belonged to no one in particular. On the back, in a corner where no one else would bother to look, she added her own small circle around the timestamp, 307, and then let her pen drift down the margin in a slow curve that did not close, A line that could have been a wave or a hand or the shape of a town catching its breath. When the meeting broke, the room emptied in a rustle of nylon and the soft slap of wet soles. Emma stepped out into the hallway with the others and then, almost without thinking, peeled off toward the narrow corridor by the vending machines. The wall of framed photos waited there, brass plaque polished brighter than the glass. Third from the left, Noah looked out at a point over her shoulder, frozen mid-smile in a winter jacket, the snow behind him blurred into a white smear. The dates under his name still ended 5 years ago. She didn't touch the frame. Her hand rose halfway and hovered there, close enough that her fingertips picked up the chill leaking from the glass. For a heartbeat, she saw not her own pale reflection but the curve of a palm on another window, a hand pressed flat and then dragged down, leaving a duller arc. Outside, through the narrow pane at the end of the hall, Main in Third tilted back into view. The traffic light on the corner blinked steadily on yellow now, not frozen, not stuck, just doing its small, repetitive work above a street that had survived the night. A bus rolled past the intersection, its windows fogged, its route number glowing faintly against the morning. Emma watched it turn toward the harbor, a familiar arc of metal and exhaust tracing the same streets she had ridden 100 times half asleep. Somewhere beyond those buildings lay the laundromat, the motel lot, the Harbor Mart sign that had kept blinking long after the storefronts around it went dark. Places where hands had met glass, where circuits had tripped and reset. She let her hand fall back to her side and walked toward the stairs, the printed graph still warm from her grip. Behind her, the conference room door swung shut on the official version of the night. Ahead, the city waited in its washed-out daylight, every window another possible screen. On the page she carried, the line of the load curve ran smooth into morning, the dip at 3:07 just one mark among many. In her mind, it stayed brighter than the rest, a small, deliberate darkness she had chosen, opening into a shade she did not yet have words for.